May 14, 1942. The clocks in Hampton Roads tick toward midnight, and the shoreline finally looks like it understands there's a war on. Street lamps are hooded. Theater marquees are dark. Kitchen curtains are pinned tight with clothespins. Out past the capes, a file of blacked-out ships steadies into formation. Tankers and freighters riding low, bows lifting to the same small swell as if sharing one slow breath. On the mast of the lead escort, a shaded lamp flickers once, twice. Orders passed in pulses of light no one else is meant to see. Somewhere beyond the edge of vision, a periscope tries to stitch a target out of the darkness and comes up with almost nothing. If turning points make your heart beat faster, subscribe to What If Wars, because nights like this decide more than we know. Roll the tape back 4 months. Early 1942, and the ocean off our coast glitters as if to help the enemy find us. Operation Drumbeat has begun. German U-boats slide along the continental shelf like wolves catching the scent of a lit porch. Shore towns glow. Boardwalks hum. Lighthouses throw their old friendly beams. Merchant ships run alone, their silhouettes drawn in silver against city light and winter moon. From a periscope, the skyline itself becomes a sighting tool. Horizontal lines, right angles, predictable shadows. A captain can lay his torpedo tracks using our own reflections. The first hammer blow lands in daylight. March 26, 1942, off Cape Hatteras. The American tanker SS Dixie Arrow is pushing south with a belly full of oil, sea flat as a plate. At 06:03, U-71 looses a spread, 3 torpedoes in quick succession. The first hit throws a sheet of flame up the starboard side. The second folds steel like wet cardboard. In a handful of heartbeats, the sky is black with smoke, and the water around the ship looks like it's boiling. Crewmen kick free of lines, hands shredded by rope burns. Lifeboats scraping down the falls. One boat clears. Another capsizes in a slick so thick it grabs at wrists and ankles. Close enough to shore for fishermen to smell it. Close enough for people on the beach to watch gulls circling and not understand what they're seeing until the sirens start. 2 weeks later, the night itself becomes a weapon. April 11, 1942, 5 miles off Jacksonville, Florida. The tanker SS Gulfamerica is walking a lonely line up the coast, her wake ghosting in phosphor. At 04:22, U-123 strikes from the dark, a single torpedo into the starboard tanks. The blast drives fire through the deck like a fist. She keeps burning, brighter and brighter, until folks on the sand can read the front page by her light. Then the U-boat does something Americans thought only happened far from home. It surfaces, rolls with the swell, and rakes the tanker with a deck gun, shells marching across steel in a scene lit by the ship's own dying glow. Rescue craft push out from Mayport through water that hisses and pops. Survivors cling to hatch covers, faces streaked black, eyes reflecting orange. The pattern sets like concrete, single ships, bright horizons, clean angles for the attacker. The nickname Torpedo Alley, that bend off Cape Hatteras, stops sounding like a joke and starts sounding like a map note. Night after night, periscopes slice the skin of the sea and vanish. Dawn after dawn, oil spreads like an accusation. And then the Gulf learns the same lesson. May 12, 1942, at the mouth of the Mississippi River. The turbine tanker Virginia rides low with fuel, slowing near the pilot buoy where river and sea shake hands. U-507 is waiting. The hit throws a wall of fire across the Delta's doorway. Radio rooms from New Orleans to Mobile light up at once. In kitchens along the river, people freeze with coffee halfway to their mouths and listen to the operator repeat words they hoped they'd never hear about waters they thought were safe. A tanker's name becomes a prayer. A pilot station becomes a horizon of smoke. These are only 3 nights and 1 morning, but you could pick almost any page from January to May and find the same ink. Unescorted freighters stitched with light. Tankers limping on a single screw. Lifeboats lowering against a city's reflection. On shore, merchants argue about dimming signs. A few bulbs can't matter, while civil defense wardens knock on doors with rolls of tape for windows and cardboard shields for headlights. In the wheelhouse of a lone ship, a lookout steadies binoculars against cold rail and knows to his bones that every bulb behind him makes his own shadow sharper, He has a whistle hung round his neck and a pencil behind his ear. He scans because scanning is the only control a single ship has. So, the question lands with the weight it deserves. How do you stop an enemy that owns the angles, the timing, and the darkness? How do you turn the ocean from their hunting ground into our guarded road? You can't wish the periscope away. You can't argue a torpedo off its run. You have to change the picture the enemy sees. Back to May 14th, 1942, the night we began to redraw that picture. From Hampton Roads, a coastal convoy, tankers, freighters, tugs with barges, leans into the southbound route to Key West. No advertising the fact, no hubris, just rules. Maintain interval, hold station, follow the zigzag plan, radios cold unless ordered. Show nothing to the horizon that doesn't need to be shown. On each flank, dark escorts shoulder the night, bows shouldering spray, depth charge rails rigged, guns manned. Overhead, if you listen hard, a distant drone stitches the sky. A coastal patrol that means a U-boat's approach is no longer a private conversation between predator and prey. On land, the change feels personal. Boardwalks go quiet. A theater manager kills the marquee and hears the click echo down an empty block. A mother pins an extra blanket over the kitchen window and tucks her son back in without turning on the lamp. A lighthouse winks once and then wears its hood like a soldier's helmet. Darkness becomes policy instead of accident. And out beyond the capes, a German captain lifts his scope and searches for the easy picture he has come to trust. A bright skyline behind a crisp silhouette. A loner throwing a neat V of wake, a deck watch bathed in stray light. He sees black. He sees a shape that might be two shapes, or three, and a fourth that moves when he moves. He sees a splash he can't place, and then faintly hears something he does not like at all. A ping, then another, a heartbeat that is not his. What flipped the board in weeks, not years? Why did the bright coast that drew torpedoes in March become, by July, a coastline of silence that pushed the hunters outward? Hold that thought. We were late to reshape the sea, and the reasons weren't just hardware and hull numbers. They were human. Escorts were scarce. Training pipelines were still catching up. District lines ashore felt like fences at sea, and messages had to travel through new offices that were still learning one another's names. Habit did the rest. For years, coastal shipping was a routine. Point the bow, keep your schedule, hug the shore where the pilots were, and call it good. Then routine turned into risk, and risk turned into smoke on the horizon. Walk with me into a beach town at dusk in April. A boardwalk shopkeeper is wrestling with a ladder and a bag of dark cloth, arguing with a neighbor who sells saltwater taffy. If we shut the lights, no one comes. If we don't, they'll find the ships. Down the block, a civil defense warden in a stiff armband carries a box of tape and cardboard headlight shields, knocking on doors one by one. Inside, a radio murmurs names from the sea, the way a storm list would. Curtains get pinned, then unpinned when customers complain, then pinned again after a siren test rattles the storefront glass. The habit of light is hard to break. The ocean, watching all this, is patient. Now climb up to the bridge wing of a freighter, jogging alone past a city's glow. The lookout has salt in the seams of his coat, and the wind in his teeth. He knows the drill. Zigzag plan posted by the helm, lifeboat stations assigned, a bosun who checks the davits twice before midnight. But he also knows the shape of his own ship when there's a bright skyline astern. It's a cutout, crisp and readable, and somewhere a lens might be turning under a slick cap of water. He scans because scanning is what a single ship can do. He keeps a whistle on a lanyard and a pencil behind his ear. His hands are steady, his eyes never rest. The ledger added one ugly line on a cold night off New Jersey before the change came. February 26, 1942, 10 miles east of Barnegat Light. The tanker R.P. Resor ran north with fuel, alone. Just after midnight, she took 2 torpedoes, and the blasts lit the sea so fiercely that the glow was seen from shore. She burned through the night, tanks feeding flames that walked the deck, paint blistering, steel complaining like a living thing. A lifeboat capsized in the slick. Men went overboard into water that looked like ink and moved like tar. By sunrise, she was still there, a lighthouse of fire, a lesson you could point to from the beach. The skyline behind her had done the hunter's work. So, Why no convoys sooner? Count the constraints. We didn't have enough fast escorts to stretch from Maine to Key West and back, not with other commitments, not with training wheels still on some of our newest crews. Routing offices were building their maps as they walked. Coastwise trade was thick with small ships whose masters trusted the inshore lanes and their own routines. And ashore, mayors and merchants lobbied to keep the season alive. Dim, don't darken. As if a compromise with physics could confuse a periscope. Pressure grew anyway. Letters reached governors' desks. Editors stopped printing soft verbs. Officers from across the Atlantic, veterans of years in the cold gray, laid out the logic without drama. Gather the ships. Give them teeth. Take away the backdrop. Dim outs became stricter. Headlights got slitted, streetcars ran with shades down. Lighthouses hooded their beams or went to coded flashes. Patrol planes learned the tide lines and the shoals the way fishermen know them. Radio operators practiced silence until it felt like a habit, not a hardship. The arguments on the boardwalk didn't vanish. They just got quieter. A hotelier stared at a dead sign and counted the empty rooms. A restaurateur locked his door early and tried not to think about payroll. A teenager with a new car let an air raid warden paste black tape across his headlights and drove home slow, seeing only what the next 30 feet of road allowed. The darkness felt unnatural at first, like holding your breath too long. Then it began to feel like a choice you make together. Out at sea, that same choice needed structure. Convoys require choreography, assembly points, sailing lists, turn counts, signal books, officers who can keep a column aligned when the swell slants and fatigue sets in. They require a promise from the escorts, we'll be there, and a promise from the merchants, we'll hold station, no matter how slow it feels. That promise was late to form, only because everything else was late to exist. The ships, the crews, the radios, the routines. But once the pieces touched, they stuck. There was one more pre-pivot night that captured everything at stake. January 15th, 1942, off Long Island, the tanker Coimbra took torpedoes from a raider prowling our winter surf. She burned within sight of the coast, smoke blown inland on a north wind. People on the beach watched the columns rise and thought, for a second, that some film company must be staging a scene. Then the wind shifted, and the smell told the truth. We were not a safe backdrop. We were part of the stage. By late April, the tone hardened. The language and orders lost its wiggle words. Dim outs became blackouts. Permits appeared. Timetables set the hours. Police cruisers rolled slow with their own lights masked. In the port districts, you could feel the mood change at dusk. Voices dropping, doors shutting. The last lamp dying with a small, decisive click. The ocean had our answer now. We just had to send it in one clear sentence. A date went up on the board. Assembly signals were rehearsed. Escorts fueled, depth charge racks loaded, guns manned, lanterns shaded. Routes were drawn down the coast and around the Keys, across familiar water that was about to feel different. When the ink dried, the coast didn't simply get darker, it got organized. The night we met at the Capes, that night in mid-May when the first southbound line left Hampton Roads and pointed for Key West, wasn't a stunt or a gamble. It was the moment routine gave way to rule. The shore would keep its word. The ships would keep formation. The escorts would keep watch. And the hunters, lifting their scopes, would find a picture they didn't recognize. The stage was set. The switch was thrown. The coast went dark. Now, watch what happens when the lines tighten, the radios hush, and the ocean learns a new rhythm. The change didn't arrive as a speech, it arrived as a formation. May 14th, 1942, just after sundown, the southbound column from Hampton Roads noses past the Capes and points for Key West. Orders ride in shuttered flashes and hand signals. Spacing is measured in ship lengths and breadth. The convoy number chalked on a board ashore becomes a living shape on the water. Tankers low and heavy, freighters high and stubborn, a tug dragging a barge like a quiet promise. To either side, lean escorts keep their own counsel. Sonar rooms humming, depth charge rails rigged, gun crews with mugs of bitter, midnight-strong coffee, the kind you drink without sugar, the kind that tastes like you intend to make it to morning. This is how the ocean feels when you change its rules. On the bridge, the red lamp chart table glows just enough to read bearings. The zigzag plan sits clipped by the helm. The helmsman follows it like a psalm. A signalman counts intervals by touch, 1, 2, 3, and throws a blink the next ship can read, but a mile away would miss entirely. Engines hum in a pattern that becomes more than noise. It's a shared heartbeat. Above, a faint drone stitches the sky. Coastal patrol, slow and patient, eyes sweeping the lanes the way a lighthouse used to sweep the shoals. And ashore, the choreography spreads like ink. Northbound and southbound lanes set on schedules. Assembly points announced. Harbor patrols herding latecomers into line. Routes spool down the seaboard, around Florida's heel, and out into the Caribbean. Atlantic traffic braided into repeating loops, with names mariners memorize the way truckers learn highways. What was once 100 lonely calculations becomes one collective choice repeated, night after night. The first test comes quickly, because it always does. A few nights into the new rhythm, somewhere off the Outer Banks, a periscope feathers the surface and searches for the old picture. A single silhouette, bright skyline behind it, the easy angle a hunter dreams about. Instead, the lens finds a smudge that resolves into 3 shapes, then 6. No deck lights, no talk on the air, only black water and the faint white scars of wakes. The submarine edges in. On the starboard wing of the lead escort, a petty officer hears the sonar's beat change. Ping, 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 ping. Bearings are called soft and quick. A ladder of depth charges walks down the sub's last guess, each blast hefting a wall of water into the dark. The convoy doesn't break. It breathes. Intervals close and open again. A merchant gun crew squints into nothing and holds fire because rule beats impulse now. Minutes later, the sea settles into ripples and oil freckles the surface. The column moves not because it is fearless, but because it is disciplined. By the end of May, the lanes feel practiced. Northbound columns return up the same rail the southbound used, like trains passing at night with their shades drawn. Escorts refuel on a drumbeat. Pilots in canvas and metal patrol planes learn the color of the water when a hull lies just below it. Radio operators keep their silence so tightly that when a single coded burst does crackle through, men straighten as if a door has opened. June brings scale. New York sends strings of freighters toward the Caribbean under dark orders and blacked-out decks. Florida's run, once a parade of easy targets, turns into a guarded corridor where even a late-night cigarette on the fantail earns a quiet reprimand. In the Gulf, cutters shoulder into the lanes, sonar men tapping pencils, the old habits. We've always run alone here, giving way to a new set of expectations you can feel in the pace of a watch. And then comes a day that says out loud what the last weeks have been whispering. July 15th, 1942, east of Cape Lookout. A southbound convoy rounds the shoulder of the Carolinas. A U-boat slides in, close enough to see a column of stacked shadows, and decides to take the risk anyway. Torpedoes streak, 2 hits hammer the line, steel screams, and for a few heartbeats, it feels like spring again. But the answer arrives faster than the attacker expects. Armed merchantmen throw tracers that stitch the night. An escort barrels in, sonar singing. 2 patrol planes dive in sequence, dropping depth charges that leave white domes behind them. The submarine doesn't get a second act. The convoy closes ranks around its wounded and keeps moving. In March, this would have been a string of fires on the horizon. In July, it's a wound that heals while it walks. This is what a convoy feels like from the bridge in the small hours. The taste of brine and soot. The whisper of signal flags you can't show but still imagine. The steady, almost tender way a helmsman leans his wheel into the next zig of the zigzag. It is the discipline of not rushing to a flare, the trust that an escort you cannot see is already turning toward it, the knowledge that a plane you only hear will be above you when the gray light comes. And this is what a blackout feels like from the beach. The marquee dead for the summer, headlamps taped to slits, a lighthouse hooded so tight you can forget it exists. A shopkeeper checks the door a second time and whispers goodnight to no one. A child wakes and asks why the moon looks different. A mother says, "It's wearing its hat," and pins the curtain tighter. Click by click, habit becomes ritual, and ritual becomes reflex. Routing offices hum. Sonar rooms learn the difference between a whale and a hull. Gunners practice the 20 seconds that matter. Pilots memorize the way a periscope's feather looks when the wind is from the south. The pieces that used to grind now begin to mesh. Escorts, patrols, radios, routes, silence, speed. Teeth dropping into teeth until the motion is smooth enough to trust with lives. Somewhere out there, a captain who once wrote that our coast was his easiest ground lifts his scope, sees only disciplined dark, and realizes the picture he was hunting has been replaced. The wheels have caught. The machine is turning. June arrives, and the ocean's picture begins to change. Close to shore, the easy silhouettes thin out. The near-beach plumes that felt routine in March give way to quieter nights, longer stretches of nothing, an absence you can measure in lives. The pins on a wall map start to drift outward, away from neon and boardwalks, off the sandbars and out toward the straits, the Gulf lanes, the blue water rides between islands. If you were telling it without numbers, you'd say, by July, periscopes are hunting in darker places for longer, and more often they find patience staring back. Florida's run feels the shift first. June 13, 1942, in the Straits of Florida, southwest of Key West. A U.S. Coast Guard cutter, Thetis, is part of a killer group tracing the warm channels when her sonar men hear the sound they've trained their lives around. Bearings, range, then a turn that bites deep. Depth charges roll in a fast practice ladder. In another season, the hunter would have slipped away with new targets ahead. On this June morning, Thetis leaves a line of white boils and, moments later, the proof that ends an argument? Oil on the surface, debris lifting through the slick. U-157 is gone. The strait feels smaller afterward, not because it is safer yet, but because the rules ashore and afloat have started to meet each other in the middle. The Florida-Caribbean corridor refuses to be simple, even as it hardens. A week can hold both a strike on a tanker and a night where an escort turns a submarine's approach into a retreat no one will ever write a headline about. Convoys with the KS, KN, KG, and tag letters pass through the narrow water like trains with curtains drawn, all black and discipline. Patrol planes pace them. Radio silence holds. When a light does blink, it blinks in code. When a shape does leave station to help a straggler back into line, a shadow replaces it before a periscope can read the gap. Mid-July draws a line under the new reality with ink you can still see. July 15, 1942, east of Cape Lookout. Convoy KS-520 is southbound. 19 merchantmen in 3 columns with a ring of teeth around them. The German U-576, already limping from damage, rolls the dice anyway. 4 torpedoes from a good angle. The Nicaraguan freighter Bluefields goes under fast. 2 other ships take wounds and live. But the response comes as if a lever has been thrown. 2 Navy Kingfisher planes drop charges that pop like thunderheads on the sea. The merchant Unicoi fires her deck gun. The escorts rush in with sonar singing. The submarine that once would have slipped away inside a curtain of panic never gets that second act. The convoy closes around its hurt and holds course. The lesson ripples outward. The attacker has to survive the counterpunch now, and the counterpunch is ready. The Gulf of Mexico learns to answer too, and it answers in a way no one forgets. July 30th, 1942, about 50 miles south of the Mississippi Delta, the passenger steamer SS Robert E. Lee is headed in under escort when a torpedo from U-166 tears into her. She lists, calls for help, and begins to settle. Her escort, the patrol craft PC-566, spots a periscope and swings hard, dropping a pattern of depth charges over the place where the ocean just blinked. The sea hurls white shoulders into the air. Then, oil, debris, and a silence that means someone won't be writing home. The steamer is lost, but the hunter is lost with her. In March, the story would have ended differently. In July, the arc bends back. Listen, briefly, to a captain below the surface who loved these coasts when spring began. In his log, if he wrote honestly, he'd say the shore once helped him shoot. Cities drew the outline. Loners made the arithmetic easy. Now, his periscope shows him a night without edges. Where he expects a single target, he sees a column. Where he wants a bright backdrop, he finds blackout. Where he needs a quiet exit, he hits a wall of pinging and sometimes a plane behind that. He can still strike, but every shot feels like ringing a bell in a room full of men who have agreed not to panic. This is how the curve bends when you narrate it in images instead of digits. In March, the coastline glows and single ships draw neat V-wakes. each one a signature a periscope can read. In May, the lights die and the ships gather. The wakes fold into each other. The discipline grows teeth. In June and July, the red marks on a chart step offshore, farther into the straits, deeper into the Gulf, out beyond the last sandbar's easy water, because hunting near the beaches now comes with an answer the hunters don't want. The answer is organized silence. The answer is company at sea. Not every outcome is triumph, not every convoy writes a clean ending, but the trend is felt on decks and in kitchens. A tanker crew makes port with scorch marks on paint and tells the story over thick coffee to men who notice what didn't happen. A second hit, a panic scatter, a long lit night on the horizon. A cutter's sonar team walks ashore and sleeps without dreaming of echoes for the first time in months. A boardwalk stays dark, again and again and again, until that darkness no longer feels like a loss, but like a promise kept. End the night with something small that matters. A southbound column clears Key West and slides into the Gulf at 2 a.m. No flares, no pings, no rush of engines that don't belong. Just the whisper of bow waves and the soft click of a signal lamp, confirming intervals in a language only they speak. An escort turns lazily to sweep a sector and returns to station without a word. Dawn lays a pale stripe over the water. 30 miles back, a U-boat captain watches that stripe and decides, not tonight. Nothing happens. And in this war, on this coast, that nothing is a victory. When the ocean finally quiets, you can hear people again. A wheelsman from a southbound tanker steps onto the pier with paint dust on his sleeves and the ghost of cordite in his hair. In March, he learned to sleep in snatches, one eye on the ladder, one ear tuned for the clang that meant abandoned ship. In July, he sleeps a straight hour on a bench beside the gun mount and wakes shocked that his body remembered how. He pours coffee that tastes like iron and salt. He looks at the skyline and notices what isn't there, the glow that used to sketch his ship for a stranger's eye. We made it, he tells no one in particular, and then he says it again as if the second time will lock it in place. A shopkeeper in a beach town twists the deadbolt on a storefront she used to close at midnight. The sign above her door has been dark for weeks. The bulb is still good, but the cord hangs slack. At first, the blackout felt like erasing herself. Now it feels like writing in a different ink. She tapes the last sliver of window where light could leak and walks home by the sound of her own shoes. In March, people peered from porches at Orange on the horizon and asked, "Is that a storm?" In July, the horizon is just horizon. She stands on the sand and listens for waves, not sirens. On the bridge of a freighter running point in a July convoy, a young signalman counts intervals the way some people count prayers. 1, 2, 3, blink. He has learned that steady is a kind of courage. The hardest thing he does all night is nothing. No chatter on the set, no flares at the first rumor of trouble, no turning out of line when fear nudges his shoulder. When the lead escort calls a quiet course change, he relays it in a shade of light so thin it feels like a secret kept by the sea itself. He tucks the lamp away and presses a palm to the rail. The hull hums back like a living thing. A few miles beyond the convoy's tail, a captain in a boat made for hunting accepts a different truth. In winter, the coast helped him shoot. In spring, panic helped him escape. By July, the water around him has rules, and the rules are not his. He holds the periscope a second longer than he should, and sees only disciplined dark. He writes in his book anyway. No targets, heavy escort, aircraft. He closes the cover and listens to his boat breathe. This is the human ledger, written without numbers. A deckhand who finally takes off his boots before he sleeps. A lighthouse keeper who lowers a hood over his lens and feels useful in a new way. A warden who tapes a teenager's headlights and says thank you to a kid who expected an argument. A tug captain who keeps a barge in line at 2 knots, because it matters that every hole arrives. A pilot who learns to read the ocean's surface like a pulse and circles back on a feather that might be a periscope and might be wind, and does it again because routine is how you keep promises. The lesson isn't glamorous. It rarely is. Improvisation built the first weeks of our response and also some of our worst nights. What bent the curve was sameness, imposed and kept. The same distances between ships, the same hours of darkness ashore, the same silence on the radio, the same turn count off a cape where the shoals wait for any skipper who misses a beat. It looked like boredom from a distance. It was anything but. It was choreography that turned individuals into a pattern strong enough to break someone else's. If you wanted to draw the change, you wouldn't need a number. You'd need two maps. On the 1st, January to May, red marks huddle close to the beach, off the Carolina Bend, near the Florida Run, at the Delta's mouth. You'd see a tanker named in smoke and a freighter drawn as a burning line. On the 2nd, June to July, the red steps outward. Dots migrate into the straits, then into the Gulf lanes, into blue water between islands. The space near our boardwalks and piers, the space that once invited attack, begins to look like a margin someone has underlined. Not here, not like that, not anymore. We did not erase danger. We moved it. We shrank it near home by taking away the bright backdrops and lonely targets that made spring feel like a grim routine. We replaced panic with pattern. We answered speed with patience. We made the ocean slower, and in that slowness lived stacked up in the best possible way. Arrivals instead of names read on the radio. So, picture a last, ordinary morning in July. A convoy finishes its night run and meets the pale line of dawn. The sea is quiet in the way you learn to trust only after you've heard it shout. A bosun checks the lashings on a deck load. A cook cracks eggs on a hot plate that jumps with the ship's rhythm. A signal lamp winks once and goes still. Along the coast, a shopkeeper lifts a gate, sells bread by candle stub, and plans to keep the bulbs in their sockets for as long as it takes. The map on a wall in a harbor office gets 3 pins moved a little farther offshore. No speeches, no brass band, just the small, stubborn acts that make a pattern strong enough to carry strangers home. In the end, the picture that beat the periscope was simple. Ships together, lights out, radios quiet, eyes up, planes above. A country learning to breathe in one rhythm with its coast. The board flipped not by luck, not by a single hero, but by thousands of hands doing the same right thing until the ocean changed its mind. The content of this video is compiled from many sources. If something is wrong or needs correction, please comment below. See you next time.